I think trust with people needs to be discerned and careful how we use that. With God, you can trust him 100%. And, there's no doubt about that now. But if you're broken and fragmented in any way, you might not feel that way or even know that you feel that way. And therefore you're holding back. And a lot of people don't trust God because he's two-faced from the teaching. Well, look at what he did in the Old Testament. It's like, whoa. And then you got this God who's angry and needs appeasing, and therefore, well, how are you going to trust him? Well, he'll send you to hell if you get it wrong. Whoa. Well, how can you trust that God? So it's complicated when you don't know how much of that programming is subconsciously affecting how you view God and how you view being able to trust him.
Well, what I've not asked you in a long time is, it seems that the resident disease that doesn't want to go away keeps coming back again and again and again. You get any insights from the Lord on it, or any direction on how to deal with it?
No, I mean, I feel there's a sense where, the reality is, it is what it is now. And I think, we went through all of these different things and different lockdowns and different this, that, and the other. And now, it's probably, as bad as it's been for quite a while, and no one's bothered, because I think people aren't dying and the hospitals aren't being overrun. Then people are just sort of, okay, well, this is how it is. We'll just have to, get on with it. And to be honest, it's I've known a few people on my calls that have had it, and some of them have had it quite bad and some of them have had it quite mild. It just seems to be like, okay, here's sort of how it is, and from now on we're just going to have to go. Personally, I'm still living from a place of health and wholeness and not really having any negative thoughts and expectations around it all. In a bigger picture, what's going on in the world, what is God doing in it? Obviously God's going to bring something good out of it. So are people still having to address their thinking towards normal life and what is normal life and what's important to them? Probably. I think, it's an opportunity. It's always an opportunity of reflecting on, well, what is life's important things? And for me, that sort of showed that relationship was more important than what people thought, and they sort of took it for granted until they couldn't have it. So when they started to realize, hey, this is something really important to me, I think for that perspective, then I think that was a good thing to address maybe people's work-life balance. In the UK, a lot of people are now still working from home, so they've changed their work-life balance, and there's less commuting, which is for them good. So I think it's changed working practices a little bit in terms of how people view work and life and balance in it all. And I think that's not a bad thing. I was talking to someone the other day. They work for a local council, and they're majority still working at home and things, because they don't need to be in the offices. When they do go in the office, it's fine. And for some, they miss the office environment banter, and for some, they're quite happy with just going in now and again. So you're going to have some people find it better one way or another, but it's certainly reset people's thinking a little bit. But there's some really positive things going on. I mean, I saw someone sent me a link to a video of this guy who was the founder of the South African Satanic Church. Okay, this guy, and he was sharing this testimony of how he'd found the unconditional love of God, and Jesus meeting him and showing him how much he loved him. I mean, it was just such an awesome testimony. It was not such a good testimony to the church, who basically had rejected him his whole life effectively. And, but a Christian lady hugged him in such a way that it totally opened up his heart. And he was doing an interview on a radio broadcast. On the interview, basically said, I don't believe in Jesus. I don't believe he ever existed, blah, blah, blah. After the interview is finished, this lady comes up and gives him a great big hug, which he said, I've not experienced a hug like that before. Discovers she's a Christian. opens up his heart. Jesus meets with him when he did some magic ritual and told him how much he loves him. And he just basically resigned everything and has been following Jesus. He said, I haven't got to the point where I can go to church because I know most of it is still religion, and he talks about unconditional love, grace. I heard more sense from this guy than I've heard from a lot of Christians over the years.
Where did you find this? Where did you find this?
Someone sent me it, just sent me the link. Someone in South Africa who's, who knows me, sent me the link. And normally I don't follow links because you just never know where they're going to go, do you? But I just felt this one was like, okay, I'm listening to it. And it was like, I was in tears. This guy was in tears telling his story. Amazing testimony, absolutely amazing testimony. And I just thought, wow, the unconditional love of God is touching people's lives. Now, you couldn't, and he was very honest. He said, most people in this satanic church are broken people. We're looking for something. We've not found it in organized religion. We're not found acceptance. We're looking for something. And now I found it, basically. And it's God and Jesus. So it was pretty powerful stuff. In some ways, he was not condemning anybody or anything, but he made it clear that his experience with Christians was not unconditional. The guy's also gay, so is a no-no for obviously most churches. So, but he was like, God's accepted me as I am, and there's no, the kingdom of God is not a gated community that only some people can come into. It's like God's opened the door for everyone to find love. So it was powerful. And I was very encouraged, having heard it, having sort of been legislating for unconditional love and awakening to unconditional love. And the great thing was, he made this public video to explain why he'd resigned and why he had happened. And this satanic church put it on their website. So this satanic church is promoting Jesus on their website, which I thought, well, that is God. Because they had to explain why this guy had left, because he was the high profile face of their whole thing. Now he's, the guy's not come out and said, I'm not here to try and change everyone's mind. It's like people have a choice, blah, blah, blah. But this is what I've experienced, unconditional love. And it was just wonderful to hear, absolutely wonderful to hear. So I thought, well, hey, here's a sign that God's at work. And then I think, was it last night, the night before, Facebook had all these ripples about Creflo Dollar basically renouncing tithing. As basically coming out and saying, we're not under the law, we're under grace, telling all his followers to burn all the books he's written on tithing, destroy all the tapes and things on tithing, because tithing is wrong. Now, if that isn't a revelation that we're coming out from under the law and that old version of God. But, I go back probably 10, 20 years, and I listened to some of Creflo Dollar stuff on righteousness. And he had the truth there on right. We are the righteousness of God in Christ. We don't have to earn righteousness. We can't perform. It was wonderful stuff, but it was mixed in with all the other stuff, which is like, I can't be doing with all the, the sort of the preaching stuff. But when he was teaching this, it was great. And I read his book on righteousness, and it was like, yeah. And I think that was where I was on my journey, coming to that reality that my righteousness is in him and who he says I am, which is where I was. And I think God has led him on that journey, and now he's come to the point where it was all about grace, and in a very big step from realizing it's all about grace, and therefore you're not under law, and therefore God is not a legalist, to unconditional love. So I'm sure he's on that path. So I was very encouraged by that as well, because he's a pretty high profile guy.
Oh yeah, we've been to his church.
Yeah, he's a pretty high profile guy.
Yeah.
And he was coming out under no illusions. It was like, look, I'm wrong. I've been wrong. You need to ignore everything I've said on this. I was wrong. And he held up his hands and he says, look, it's part of my journey. I can't say, like me, I taught tithing. So, I can't say at the time I thought it was right. I wasn't trying to deceive anyone. I thought that's what it was. But he explained the whole thing in the teaching. And then he said, look, I know, a lot of, I think he said, did he say previous friends probably won't be getting invitations to their conventions anymore, but he said, I have to bring, this is the truth. Yeah, this is the truth. We're not under the law.
Yeah. Mike, it's ironic that you're talking about Creflo. Good morning, everyone, because just this morning, someone had sent me the recording of the teaching he did on tithing, and it just started a chain of messages, and Creflo has had an encounter with the Spirit of God, and he is teaching on the presence of God within. He's really moving into this new thing that the Lord is doing in the body of Christ. It's a beautiful thing to witness, because I used to be a member of his church back in the early 90s. So it's great. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I picked up, all those years ago, I picked up the whole thing of righteousness. So this guy's got something that the other faith teachers weren't teaching. They were, and it was almost like, here's the real message this guy's got. Forget all the rest of it. God's touched his heart. And to hear that actually he's been on that journey and is now discovering more of the intimacy, which will unveil things, because he's basically in a process of deconstruction. His deconstruction, he's come out and I now don't believe in tithing. Well, what else is he going to come out and be deconstructed over? Probably a lot, if he continues to engage God within. And then God will no doubt open up heaven for him, and he'll probably engage God in that realm as well, which is awesome. I thought it's wonderful, really.
Yes.
That had happened, and that's going to put ripples out there.
Yes.
So it's a sign that God is at work. God is at work. He's touching people's hearts. He's awakening them to love, and he's reaching out to people who run satanic churches as well as people who run Christian churches. So it's like, hey, God's no respecter of persons. He'll reach out to anybody because he loves them. And I think that for me is just wonderful. And I was very encouraged just to see, hey, you can look around and think, oh, there's a whole load of stuff going on, which really, you would say, well, that's not so good, and this is difficult, and we're facing a lot of difficult situations. But then you can see, no, God's at work. God's love is at work. He really does want us to experience it and share it and encourage others into it. And for me, it's like, hey, that's good news. That's a real blessing, that I can see signs of change. And so I'm very optimistic. I'm not looking into the stuff which is there, and we've got situations in the world that obviously are not ideal, and we would want to see changed, but people are changing, and that ultimately will be the key, is people changing and shifting the balance of light and being a reflection of God and love, and the world will begin to see that, and it can encounter it. And I was talking to a lady earlier in Australia, and she was telling me of her encounters with some angelic beings and some fallen angelic beings, and how God had been leading her and showing her what to do. And I was like, wow, this is just so amazing, that the restoration of all things message is, essentially being shared and spread, and God is moving people. When I shared years ago about the 4 streams that are tributaries that are running into one big river of restoration, those people who are on each of those streams and tributaries don't really know where it's actually heading, but I know where it's heading. And when they get into that river, they're going to go where the river takes them. Even though they might not be aware of it now, it is leading them to full restoration. Even though they might be seeing the truth about certain other things, they're going to find that river will enlighten them and take them into places they never imagined, including experiences of God and all sorts of things, which some of them have got no clue about right now. But that's where it goes. As soon as that tributary hits the main river, they're going to be swept along. It's going to take them at some pace, I'm sure, which I feel, hey, I look and see the signs that people are awakening. They may be awakening to this area, they may be awakening to this area, but actually it's an awakening that is going to begin to take them into God's heart, and it will open up their hearts to an experience of God which will radically change their lives, you know. So from that perspective, I think there's a lot of really positive things happening, and God is good, and that's being, you know, released and shared. And I'm sort of encouraged by that, to be honest, you know. And you look for signs, you know.
So how much if at all, how much pushback have you gotten over the restoration of all things?
None, really.
Good.
To be honest, I mean, there was one guy who, you know, made it his mission to sort of comment on everything we posted, you know, in a sense, when I was talking about the whole hell thing, you know, and sort of Christian universalism type stuff. He took offense at that, and it was like, you know, but in the end, you know, I spoke to him and said, look, you're not going to change my mind. This is our channel. You can post whatever you like on your channel, but, you know, you please not stop posting that stuff on our channel. And in the end, it was like, you know, he stopped, and I haven't had any trouble since. Now, I was already sort of blackballed by, you know, some groups anyway, before I even got to that stage. So that wasn't an issue. So when I went, you know, the restoration of all things was just another nail in it for them. So that wasn't a problem. But in terms of the engaging God people and the people I've engaged with, I've just found more and more people are open, because this is love. This is where God is, where he's going. So very little negativity, if any. And even on, you know, all the sort of stuff we post online, I mean, we post obviously on YouTube and all that stuff, there's very few negative comments, very few. Now, I'm legislating that people who would be offended don't see it, because I don't want to offend people where they are in their journey. Maybe later on in their journey, they'll be ready to see it, and that'll be fine. So I'm not looking to be controversial or create problems and make waves, but I'm just going to share the truth as it is, as I experienced it. So personally, no real negativity or negative stuff from a personal angle, and as ministry, not hardly even less, I think. So, you know, and I think you just got to trust that, hey, God knows what he's doing, and you know, you speak the truth. You know, some people are not going to agree with that. Well, I wouldn't have agreed with it in the past, so, you know, I understand. So I've got grace for people who disagree, and they have the right to disagree. Now, that's not true for everybody, because some people have suffered for, you know, this message, you know. And I look, you know, Nancy Cohen, she's suffered a lot over the years, of a lot of rejection, a lot of negativity, but she's full of love, so she's just sort of get on with it, you know. And Justin really, I think, has had a tough time with people really trying to, you know, dissuade him from following this path. But, you know, hey, we're in a relationship, and, you know, he's on his own journey. So, you know, he's realized that, you know, he's not going to be dissuaded by when God's heart is showing him. So, but that's not easy though, when you've got good friends and they start telling you, you know, well, I'm not sure they went as far as to tell him he's a heretic, but probably that was the underlying intention, that they tried to get over to him, that, you know, this is not a good place. And essentially, you know, relationship is not going to be possible in this, if you believe this stuff. And I think that's the sad thing that I have seen, is that for some, relationship is at stake over beliefs. And to me, that's never right. We should never break relationships over disagreements over things that are belief systems, when we're actually all part of one family, and we need to realize that we're a part of that family forever. So you can't escape people forever. You might cut them off here, but you're gonna eventually have to fellowship with them. You know, we're all in Christ, and Christ is all in us. So there's a, you know, fact there, we are all one, you know, one new man in Christ, whether they like to not want to be or not, they are. So in a sense, you know, I do feel that the more people awaken to unconditional love and the consequences of that, some will harden themselves and become more legalistic, and then will, you know, in a sense, become denominational over certain issues. Now, usually you become denominational over things you agree with, but to become denominational over something you don't agree with is sort of, you know, not really a good look, is it? We're the anti-church or the anti-this movement, you know. So, you know, so yeah, there is that. And, you know, I was saddened to see someone post something, you know, a month or so ago, just coming out and saying, oh, we're not walking with this group anymore because, you know, we don't agree with their belief over this, you know, a very well-known figure that you know really well. And I just felt, okay, you might disagree over this, but this is a minor. This is not a major issue. I can understand you may have disagreements over the restoration of all things, yeah. But it was really, I think, the Arthur Burke sort of alien human spirit stuff. And it's just like, well, does it really matter what you call them? You know, someone's free is the issue. Let's be concerned about the person setting free rather than what they were set free from. You know, so it was a little bit like, I don't really get why you're so uptight over this issue, because it's not really a big thing. But he was, and he presented this case of, you know, what his view is of people who get delivered and whatever. And, you know, and it was like, okay, well, but the sadness of it, now that validated his followers to do the same thing over whatever, you know. And once someone comes out and says, well, as a movement, this is how we're going to function, we're not going to be in relationship with people who disagree with us, which is literally what was said, then that gives anyone an excuse to say, well, I'm not going to be in relationship with you because you don't believe the same as I do. Which, that's why we've got 40,000 denominations in the first place. You know, it's like now that's operating in the mystic movement, where the same people are saying, well, you're doing this, you're not walking with us anymore, or we're drawing a line. You know, if you're over the other side of that line on the restoration of all things, you can't be in relationship with us, which has been said. So to me, I find that very sad and pretty unnecessary, really. And it's like, you know, they weren't saying Jesus wasn't real or Jesus wasn't the Son of God, or, you know, it's like, it was a pretty, like, you know, almost like, I just thought, why is this such an issue? You know? And then the guy came out and sort of said about, oh yeah, but you can multiply demons from within you and birth them. And it's like, which is total Kabbalah teaching. And I'm like, okay, so you're not believing in this, but actually you're now saying that we're all multiplying demons and making the world a worse place, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, okay, it's just like, yeah, you know, it's like, you know, nothing I hadn't heard before, but at the end of the day, it's like, do you think that's a good thing to be encouraging people that's okay then? Is that all right? Well, no, it's not okay, but it happens, you know. It's just, well, so has it happened that people get stuck here because of trauma and they need help to cross over? What's the problem with that? You know, it's not a big deal, really. The main thing is that it's not affecting people, you know.
So,
but,
you know, so that being the case, any idea what it is about trauma that would cause this to happen?
Well, trauma traps the memory within the cells of a person of what's happened. And if that is so severe, it causes dissociation, and then dissociation from, I guess, life, you know, whatever would happen. And of course, the soul is so traumatized, and they're usually trapped to the trauma and the memory of the place or the person, that they can't escape it. And that seems to be what happened. I'm not an expert in it because I'm not ministered to people in it, but Arthur Burke has got a set of teaching on it, and others minister to it. But that seems to be, you know, that's certainly something I've seen in the whole issue of people having the difficulty of dealing with past memories and it affecting them and being trapped, even physically. Their body starts to become toxic because of the trapped trauma within their cells, and then triggers happen, and memory triggers and all sorts of stuff. So I've seen quite a bit of that, and I can understand, you know, how that works, you know. And releasing toxic emotions is a really powerful thing, but also some of it is also physically trapped within the cells of the body, and there seems to be cell memory, you know, of the trauma, which then is released or gets triggered by certain criteria or environmental things. But also you do have, you know, real dissociation from trauma into multiple personalities, you know, or certainly stuck parts emotionally and all that type of thing. So it's definitely something I've seen a lot of.
Well, physically, and Joe had this way back in graduate school, and he came home and he told me about it, and it was sort of like, wow, is that our brain cells are constantly being rejuvenated, but they travel to parts of our body and they stay there. And so they were making the point that when someone says, my life flashed before me, you know, in this, you know, instance of real trauma, they said that's because everything, unless there's damage to that part of the body, say like an amputation or wherever those cells were and they're removed, the potential to remember everything that's ever happened to you and to relive that experience is built within us. So it sort of makes sense when you're saying there, yeah, because physiologically it does get lodged into you and you don't lose it unless for some reason that part of the body is removed. So yeah, that explains how you never really physiologically get over it. You may not remember it, or you can deal with it, but physiologically there is real basis in science for that.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, you know, David Van Koevering used to talk about how things are always sort of stored within the fabric of things. And, you know, obviously he used the thing of DVDs, CDs or whatever, where, you know, something was stored on a piece of plastic and then got released. And he sort of gave examples of that sort of quantum physically and all sorts of stuff. So, yeah, I think it's definitely known that, you know, memory is complex and things where is consciousness? Where does it get stored? How does it work? And, you know, I think those who are sort of, you know, qualified in, you know, psychology and, you know, psychiatry and all that stuff are aware that this is a pretty huge field, and they're sort of only just really scratching the surface over consciousness and that type of thing. But also that's why places feel cold and dark, because the memory of what happened, you know, we know blood cries out from the ground, that type of thing is, well, how? Well, not literally, but it's a figurative thing that describes something about what happened here is still present here. And it's the disruption to peace, really. You know, it's not a peaceful place. And some places are dark and, you know, you want to spend time there. You know, and other places seem to be joyfully happy, and there's a great place to be. And it seems to be that even positive things are stored as well. So it's not just negative. But to be honest, whenever I move in a new house, I'm assuming, hey, there's a lot of stuff that might have happened in this house that I would probably not be happy with. So therefore, I'm going to make sure that none of that is residing in the presence of this house. So I go and cleanse the house. Now, I'm not sort of casting out demons as such, but I'm certainly making sure that none of the fabric of the memory of that building has negative stuff in it. So I start releasing positive frequencies, and people, you know, put on smelly stuff, don't they? And do essential oils and fill the atmosphere with positive energy and vibes and good stuff. So I would always, you know, whenever I went into a place, you know, I would just make sure, and it wasn't any histrionics or, you know, it was just, hey, no, I'm in authority here, and I'm, you know, releasing that frequency to cleanse this house and release any negative trauma or memories within the fabric of this building. And I'm going to bless it, and I'm going to bless this building with good memories, and there's going to be a lot of positive things that now part of this building and everything else. And then sometimes if something happens in a building, you need to redo it, because let's say someone dies or someone gets murdered or something negative happens, you just sort of you can't just sort of just carry on thinking, well, that isn't going to have any effect. So there is a sense where we need to be aware of potential things within our lives which, you know, need dealing with, and we need just to be open to the fact that we may need to deal with it, you know. And that's, I think that's just discernment and becoming more mature in discernment and being aware of more things in that way. But yeah, definitely, you know, the way the brain functions and with the limbic system of the brain and other things, it's like memory and how that links to trauma and triggers, you know, we know neural pathways form to certain memories and they trigger us. And we know some people can be so traumatized that they dissociate the pathway into a personality that hides what's happened from the person, so they don't have to face it or deal with it. And a lot of people do suffer with that, you know. So yeah, Catherine, you go, and then Pam, you got something you want to share? So
yeah, on getting back to the Satanist that had an encounter with Jesus, a couple of things that as I watched it, I was like you, Mike, I just could not stop crying.
yeah,
For great joy of the redemption of what God does. And he made that one statement, and you said it, the kingdom of God is not a gated community. And we have made it a gated community and judged people before they even step through the doors. And the other thing that really impacted me, which I thought was, it's just so huge, that he encountered 4 people that showed him unconditional love without judgment. And the 4th person was Jesus. I mean, I have watched that 2 or 3 times now, and he's talking about the things that he's writing, and he wants to share what God is showing him, you know, and I am very excited to see the path that this man is on. And then when you were talking about trauma, I've always looked at myself much younger than my chronological age. And I asked the Lord about that one day. I said, why do I always think so young? I do things from a young perspective. And he said, it's because you've been fragmented. And he asked me, he says, do you want me to show you? Do you want to meet the girls that, you know, want to come back into union with you? And I said, yes. And so I'm in this place, and I can see all of Catherine and the ages where I was fragmented through trauma. And one by one, I invited them. I repented to them. I told them I was sorry for what happened, but I loved them. And then they began to just step back into me. And I think there were like 7 of them, different ages of my life, where I'd been gone through some really bad places. And then he stepped back into me. And it was just the most amazing thing. And I am not the same person. And, you know, but he invited me. It was like he knew that this moment was coming. Yeah. And all we have to do is say yes to love. And it is all about restoration. You know, and it's just such an amazing walk with God. And that gentleman, I'm telling you, I'm so changed by his testimony. So anyway.
Yeah, also, and you know, at the end of the day, it's like he's already talking about journaling his conversations he's had over the last few months with Jesus. I mean, how many Christians, new believers, do that and have that level of intimacy from day one? They don't, because they're not taught about that. They're not encouraged of that. But he is straight in. No church, none of that. He's just talking to Jesus, conversations with the Lord, he said. And it's just like, and he's going to write it down. And well, he has written it down. He said he's got so many 800 pages of hand scribbled stuff, which he's going to put into a book. I'm really interested to see, you know, what those conversations, because I'm sure they will be mirroring the conversations we're having and the things that God is showing. And because he's talking about unconditional love and grace. And he'll find out that it's limitless grace, you know, because that is the heart that God has, you know. And I was so blessed. I was really blessed, you know, to see that and just see, hey, God's working. God's at work. You know, sometimes we don't even see what's happening. And you can think that's just something that's come to our attention. What about all the people God's working at that isn't coming to our attention, but he's still working and they're still experiencing that and coming into that relationship and beginning to hear his voice. So it's wonderful, isn't it? Absolutely wonderful. Awesome. Yeah, Pam.
Yeah, talking about trauma and, you know, what's left behind, even in a building. I'm, you know, working on my real estate license. That's one of the things, you know, was there murder or was this done? You know, those are some of the things that we have to let people know, you know, that are about to buy a house. And another thing, the opposite of that, like when I move physically to another location, I pack up. You know, a lot of what, you know, what I've done, you know, in prayer, you know, how you break up the fallow ground. I pack that up and take it with me and open it up and release it in a new place. And that gives you a head start. It gives you a big head start.
Yeah.
You
No,
know? Yeah.
No, that's great. Really good. Yeah. Okay, Michelle.
Hi, everyone. Just want to thank you and honor you again, Mike, for sharing unconditional love. And I, too, had watched the testimony of this gentleman in South Africa. And I weep because I said, Lord, how many people have I not shown unconditional love to? But in order to give it out, I have to receive it. And so I said, Lord, let me be one of those that shows unconditional love to folks like this gentleman so they can see you. And I was so blessed by that, just like you all were sharing. I also watched your soundbite, surrender and trust. And as long as I've, you know, been Christian or been following Jesus, I still have trust issues. And someone told me that as you meditate, so a lot of those things will lift off of you, things that are blocking you from trust. What have you found to make it easier for yourself?
I think when it comes to trust is not something that you just have. You know, trust is earned. And there are some people I wouldn't trust because of their track record. Now, I still need to forgive them and choose to bless them, even though I'm not going to trust them, because, you know, trust, you're wise. You got to be wise. And you wouldn't give your hands in your life into the hands of someone you can't trust. But I don't want to be suspicious and have negative memories attached to the things where I've been betrayed or hurt in the past, affecting my present and future. So although it's wise to say, okay, this person hasn't changed, therefore I'm obviously not going to trust them, but I can still love them and I can still want the best for them. So for me, having dealt with the things that have happened to me, to forgive and release the people who have, you know, where I have mistrust issues, had them in the past, genuinely, because you know, if someone lets you down, you know, you're gonna feel betrayed or let down or disappointed, and those are genuine feelings, but you've got to deal with the feelings so that those feelings don't affect your relationship in a sense of love. I can still love a person but not trust them. I can still want the best for that person and not trust them, because trust is a different thing. Trust isn't unconditional, because if it was unconditional, then you'd be trusting thieves and robbers and people in prison with your life savings. Well, you wouldn't, would you? You know, you wouldn't trust people who are untrustworthy with your life savings, because you'd be throwing your money away. So there's a sense of wisdom of how and what level of relationship you have with people. Now, let's say you know someone is a gossip. Well, you're not probably going to trust that person with your innermost secrets that no one else knows, that you wouldn't want anyone else to know, would you? Because you know it would get out there. Now, if I wanted something spread, I might use the person to spread the stuff I want spreading, perhaps, because, hey, it's going to get out. But so there's wisdom. Now, does that mean that I would have something against that person? No, because I would have dealt with their gossip or whatever they've done in the past, and I would have forgiven them and released them, and therefore then I'm not tied to them. So it's really important you're not tied to a previous memory of what's happened to you or the person, because then you're tethered to it and you can't move on. So deal with the past. That's the first thing when it comes to trust. Deal with your past mistrust issues. Have a wise approach to then how you deal with people, so that you're not tainted by your previous issues, but you've learned from them. We need to be wise. How do you get wisdom? Well, you learn from the things that have happened in the past. So you have more discernment. So I think discernment is definitely a key. But when it came to God and me and trust, I would of course said I trusted God implicitly, and I thought I did. But that was my soul sort of thinking the best of myself, because it never got tested really. So God tested it. So God literally basically showed me what the state of my soul was in true reality when it didn't go the way I wanted it to go. So when I was seeing everything, hearing everything from God, of course I trusted him, and you know, it was wonderful. When I couldn't see and hear and didn't know what was going on, I didn't trust God because I didn't know. For me, it was about, I trust when I know everything. But with God, I'm never going to know everything in one sense, because I'm not God. He's infinite and expanding, if you like. So I've got to come to the point where, no, I trust him. And I had to come to the point of surrendering my need to know to be able to trust with God. You know, and I think in life, I don't want to go around being skeptical and suspicious. I'm very open to people until they do something to make me discern what's going on, if you like. So I don't want to treat people with suspicion. And so I would talk to people, and I'm very open, and I'm share people with people, no problem. I don't really mind people knowing stuff in my life, whatever. But then if they have an agenda that then they're going to use, then I want to discern and be more careful. And you can do that ahead of time without being suspicious. So I think we can learn discernment, knowing how to deal with people, to be able to love them, but to be wise in what we would entrust them with. You know, you don't want to be entrusting your heart to someone who's going to trample all over it. And actually, Jesus said, don't cast your pearls before swine. Now, you know, that's not a very pleasant term, I guess, but literally we're saying, look, some people will just trample over everything. You know, be careful with who you share what you share with, because this is precious. You know, don't trust something precious to someone who's going to abuse it. You know, but we don't want to be so self-protected and have defense mechanisms because we're still hurting from the past that we don't trust anybody or couldn't trust anybody, including God. And I think a lot of people are still hurting and haven't potentially dealt with all the things from the past. So their defense position is, I am guarded. I'm guarding my heart and protecting my heart from potential harm. That can become a prison that imprisons you and keeps you separated from people. So we don't want to be operating out of the negative things that have happened to us, but you do want to learn and be more discerning about what you do with who you do it with in the future. But with God, I can trust him 100% implicitly without any problem. Now my soul has surrendered my need to know so that then I would trust, or know so that I would understand, and then I would be included in knowing everything. Well, if you know everything about God, well, in a sense, you don't need to trust him because you know everything. So there's a point where for me, it was like, no, when I don't know, when I don't understand, when I can't fathom this out, I trust you because you're good and you're love. So the trust comes from the fact that God is unconditionally loving. He is filled with loving kindness. He's good, he's kind, he's patient, he's tolerant, he's merciful, you know, he's gracious. You know, it's his nature and character that I trust in, you know, and he's proved that over and over and over and over again in my life, you know, so many times. So I have a track history of being able to trust God in a sense, because he's never let me down. But as my soul had been let down by others, I want to feel secure. I needed to know and understand what was going on, because there was some measure of insecurity when I wasn't in control. And literally you could say, you know, needing to know is needing to be in control. You know, so I needed to be in control of the knowledge and what was happening so I could be okay with it. Well, God wanted to show me things where I was outside of that, and I had to trust him for what he was showing me. Hence all the stuff we've already been talking about. A lot of stuff is like, you know, I wouldn't have trusted that was true years ago, a lot of it, but now I do, because I've worked through it relationally in my experiences with him. You know, so my dark cloud experience, where he separated and reintegrated my soul and spirit, needed to take place to separate me from operating independently, creating my own identity and my own value and worth out of what I was doing, even if the things I was doing were the things God wanted me to do. You know, so I had to, he wired me to sort of see the world with an eye of wanting to understand it and figure it out and see how it works, and to be able to explain and teach that to others. So that's how he wired me, but I was using that for self-validation. When I surrendered, I didn't need to do that anymore. And, you know, I think one of the things I said is that I trust you. And, you know, what he said back to me, I trust you. I thought, oh, I wasn't expecting to hear that, but that's God, you know, it's unconditional. You know, his love is unconditional in that perspective. So, yeah, everyone has to go through their own process to get to that point of surrender and, okay, I'm abandoned here. I'm not going to try and fight for my own stuff anymore. I'm trusting in your provision, your protection, your direction. I'm just going to keep walking with you and following you. That's the way I got. But it took 4 months of pain to get me to that point of surrender, you know, and I didn't want to surrender because that was my protection mechanism. You know, I filtered everything through my own understanding. And when I understood, I was happy to cooperate. When I didn't understand, I'm not cooperating, you know. But then when God told me about later on about deconstruction, all that, I had no clue. But I got to the point where I trusted. If that's what's needed, God, I trust you, I cooperate. You know, well, I wouldn't have been able to do that without having gone through that process of trusting him, having my soul and spirit separated, reintegrated, and I was healed. You know, he healed me and made me whole of the reasons that I was self-protecting and needing to control things myself, you know, because I've been wounded and damaged and betrayed and broken and all sorts of stuff in the past. You know, so, you know, no one's going to want to go around saying, oh, come and hurt me. You know, so you sort of, you know, and at the end of the day, you can become so prickly that you keep people far enough away from you, they'll never hurt you. You know, and some people are like that. Some people get the first punch in, you know, they put you on the back foot straight away, you know, and that's because they're insecure and they're making sure they've got their safe ground. They're putting the boundaries in. Don't cross. You know, and you find prickly people like that. Now, I was never prickly like that, or that wasn't the way I dealt with it, but I guarded my heart and I protected myself in going deeper in relationship with people. There was a level that I was comfortable with, which was probably more than most people would have been comfortable with, but there was still a level I was not prepared to go. And that changed when I was prepared to go there with God, and therefore that healed me and restored that area of my heart, which was probably damaged and broken, you know. But everything changed from that point. Life took on a whole different perspective. You know, things changed rapidly going from beyond there, because now I didn't need to know what God was wanting to do or to do it. I just kept walking and following, and well, look where it took. You know, it took me to all sorts of places I had no idea or would ever be able to experience or even knew existed. And if I didn't trust God, I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have been able to trust him to go and step out into dimensions and do things which are, you know, for some pretty controversial type of stuff. It's like, but I trusted God. Yeah, if this is the heart of God, I trust you. And that's why, you know, I wasn't concerned about kickback or, you know, the criticism or the trolling or anything from people, you know, on the stuff I share, because that's okay. You know, if this is what God wants me to do, then I'm going to trust him, you know, for the rest of it. I don't need to fight. You know, he's there. He's my dad. You know, he's bigger than any opposition. And if he loves me and other people don't, well, that's okay. That's their problem, not mine, you know. But years ago, I wouldn't have felt that way. You know, I needed approval and validation, and I wanted, you know, that, you know, and I did trade for position in a sense, because I wanted that position that would give me that security and give me that identity. So I traded things, you know. I'm not proud of when I look back and some of the things I did on behalf of others because I wanted their approval and wanted the position that they were offering or dangling like a carrot. So, you know, and they would send me on doing all the dirty stuff that they didn't want to do. And I did it. And it wasn't what I wanted to do, but I did it because I bought into the trade that they have the power to give me position. Well, now I realize that no, they don't. Only God has that power to put me in a place and open up opportunities and doors for me. I don't need to trade for that and lose my integrity because I'm doing things that I don't believe in, you know, which happened years ago when I was in a position of being, you know, in this church, which I really founded, but, you know, wasn't leading, or I was an elder, but wasn't actually the sort of the lead elder or whatever you want to call it. And I wanted to be full-time for God. You know, that was my ambition. You know, I wanted to serve God with everything. And, you know, and working in a hospital was like, although I enjoyed it, it was like, that wasn't it, you know. And there was this thing about, you know, becoming full-time and all that stuff. And it was a big thing those days, you know, being full-time and whatever. And I remember, you know, like there was 3 of us in eldership and there was 2 full-time positions. You know, there was 1 person who was in that position, and then there was 2 of us competing for 1 position, and we were manipulated, both of us, you know, to do things to sort of prove our loyalty, I guess. I don't know. But, you know, when I went through all the trading floor issues, you know, that was a big one that God showed me, that I was willing to compromise some of my own beliefs or standards of behavior to please somebody else, you know. And, you know, and it didn't work, you know, because at the end of the day, it doesn't work, is it? And it just makes you, you know, sort of feel bad about yourself, really, when I look back and think, you know, some of the stuff I had to do or did, you know. And it's like, now it's like, oh yeah, I can see I was just trading in for this one in a position and be willing to trade my integrity for it, which is like terrible when I look back, you know. But fortunately, you know, God forgave me and restored me and made me realize and didn't hold anything against me. But, you know, the past is quite difficult sometimes, you know. But when I recognized that, I had to choose to forgive and release that guy, because I didn't see it that way until God showed me when I was looking at this whole issue of trading and what you do for the shortcut into something. And, you know, I wanted the position, so I traded for it, you know. Yeah. So when it comes to trust, I think trust with people needs to be discerned and careful how we use that. With God, you can trust him 100%. And, you know, there's no doubt about that now. But if you're broken and fragmented in any way, you might not feel that way or even know that you feel that way. And therefore you're holding back. And a lot of people don't trust God because he's two-faced from the teaching. Well, look at what he did in the Old Testament. It's like, whoa. And then you got this God who's angry and needs appeasing, and therefore, well, how are you going to trust him? Well, he'll send you to hell if you get it wrong. Whoa. Well, how can you trust that God? You know, so it's complicated when you don't know how much of that programming is subconsciously affecting how you view God and how you view being able to trust him, you know. And although I don't think I was affected by that particularly, I was certainly affected by my own soul's insecurity and need to know things and be in control, to trust the situation and therefore to trust God in the situation. But surrender made a huge difference. And it took me a while to get to that point, because my soul had to almost lose control and reveal its nature to myself in one sense, because I'm observing my behavior going on and I'm like, what's happening, but I was out of control because God engineered the circumstances to safely allow myself to get out of control without damaging anybody else. It's just, this was to do with me and God, but it was a very significant moment in my journey to go deeper into intimacy with God, and then go through a process of renewing the mind and transformation that brought me some level of maturity, because I went through that and surrendered. But I remember about 6 weeks into this period of time saying to God, I just give up. I give up. It's okay. I give up now. I didn't mean it. I just said it because I wanted this to stop. I wanted to go back to how it was. I just said it. Well, it's like, how stupid could I have been to try and think I could deceive God by telling him I wanted to stop, but a couple of weeks later, I really meant it. I really got to the end of my rope and tether, and it was just like, okay, hands up, I surrender, I give up. I never need to know another thing, but I know you love me, and that's enough, and that was so significant in my journey. But everyone's different and everyone's journey is different. So the way God brings that about in us, but I think he brings that about in everybody, that he wants them to get to that point where they actually do not operate out of the need of the soul, but are operating at a wholeness. Now, I couldn't be whole because I was broken in that area of my soul, so I couldn't be whole if I'm broken. So he had to deal with the brokenness so to bring me into wholeness. And to be honest, I never felt more whole up to that moment, when he reintegrated my soul and spirit and put the relationship how it was supposed to be, with everything flowing from the inside out. Well, it was ultimately, it used to be on the outside, and everything came through the spirit, but now the way it is now, then we're connected to heaven from within, and God's within, and that all flows through the spirit, and the soul now just loves being in oneness and being whole in that way, which is beautiful when you sort of sense it and experience it and just know the truth of it. It's wonderful. Anyway, so yeah, it's no easy thing, but it is definitely what God would want us to do, is to just get to that point where we can say, yeah, I trust you, and then he can ask us to do some stuff he just can't ask us to do now when we don't trust him, and he can show us some stuff that we're not going to use inappropriately or use to validate ourselves and all of that. So my life changed totally after that point in 2012, which was where it was for me. So the last 10 years have been an amazing journey, really, of just going deeper and deeper and discovering more and being transformed more and more. So it's been pretty amazing. Hi everyone, we're starting a Patreon page, patreon.com/freedomarc, and we would like to invite you to partner with us in taking the message of God's unconditional love, limitless grace, triumphant mercy to a bigger global audience.